Parsley is an herb that is very, very helpful. Petroselenium sativum is the scientific name of parsley, and there's some various species names of parsley, but the parts of parsley that are used are the leaves. So that's typically the culinary role of parsley is the leaves. Roots are actually usable as well, and these are some small ones, but they can get quite large and look very turnip-like and carrot-like. And in fact, they're actually in the carrot family. And the seeds. So seeds, leaves, and roots are the primary parts that are used of the parsley plant. So some medicinal properties that parsley has. They function as a carminative, and a carminative is essentially a substance that helps decrease flatulence or intestinal gas. So it's helpful to be eaten along with beans, perhaps, or other things that may have carbohydrate qualities that tend towards creating gas. It also functions as an aperient, which is a constipation reliever, diuretic, and diuretics aid in the production of urine in the kidney, so it aids urine production, and that's helpful in other ways that we'll see down the road here too. It also has some expectorant qualities, basically helping the body to remove mucus through the bronchial and respiratory system. So this time of year, lots of different upper respiratory infections are going around, flu and whatnot. Pneumonia, I think, would also be considered a URI, an upper respiratory infection. And it'll aid in getting that mucus out of the body. And a lot of times that mucus is quite thick. Parsley juice functions as an antiperiodic. So essentially that prevents recurrence of a variety of symptoms that may be rather regular and reoccurring. So it can be a kind of a whole class of different symptoms. So the juice, so you take the leaves and you would juice them. You can use a hand crank juicer or a machine juicer. It probably take quite a bit of parsley to get a quantity of juice, but it probably wouldn't really take that much to function in a medicinal fashion. The seeds can be actually used as a fever reducer. So febrifuges are things that help reduce fever, and the seeds can be useful in that regard. Also, the seeds are helpful as a menagogue, essentially aiding menstruation. If someone has a slow period onset or has a menstruational block, that can aid the menstruation cycle in its regularity. So some benefits and uses. Again, it's a member of the carrot family, and we can see that the ones on the right there are carrot size. These are quite large. So you can use the parsley root as well as the top. We're typically accustomed to using parsley just as a garnish. It has a fairly strong peppery taste, and so is not typically eaten in large quantities, but it actually can be beneficial in that regard. So it's very rich in vitamin C and in iron. So that iron component may be helpful in during the periodic cycle, menstruation. For iron deficiency, sometimes people suffer anemia during that period of time, so that extra iron can be helpful. Also vitamin C, so rich in vitamin C, especially it's one of those ones that actually does quite well plants that can grow through the winter if protected, and keeping vitamin C from fresh vegetables and greens can help keep yourself from having a vitamin C deficiency. And it's typically manifested as deficiency syndrome is scurvy, but other symptoms of low vitamin C can just simply be a lowered immune function and onset of flu and other cold symptoms. So keeping a nice healthy level of vitamin C in your body is really helpful for maintaining your immune system. So compared to spinach we usually think of as a powerhouse, being packed with protein and other vitamins and minerals. It has more calcium than spinach by weight, more potassium than spinach, and more phosphorus. So phosphorus is very helpful in connective tissues and things like that. and it has a lot of vitamin A. Vitamin A, up to 30,000 IU, that's international units, per ounce of parsley. It doesn't take that much to get an ounce. So that's a lot of vitamin A. And vitamin A can be very helpful in a lot of different things for maintaining health. Of course, you can get vitamin A from carrots too. And it's better to actually get vitamin A from food. They did some studies some years ago. They found that vitamin A had some beneficial qualities, and they started giving it in therapeutic doses just on its own to folks. And they found some symptoms that were not beneficial, and actually had to call the study off because it was an isolate of vitamin A versus its synergistic blend as found in food. So that often can happen when you take a nutrient isolate as opposed to it in its synergistic fashion as it's found in food. So some primary uses of parsley, aside from its culinary use in salads and soups and things like that, from a medicinal standpoint, again, it functions as a diuretic, aiding the kidney and its function in urine production, promotion of menstruation. And the roots and the leaves together are great for all different types of urinary issue, including kidney stones and sand, so to speak. So that's just small bits in the ureters and in the kidney orifices, as well as liver and spleen obstructions. It's also helpful in dropsy or edema, so helping to reduce fluid retention in the tissues outside of the cell. So sometimes that can be manifested. Typically that's manifested in the legs. And you know you have edema, for example, if you've been wearing socks that have a band around them, and when you go to take your socks off in the evening, you have a constriction and it poofs out the top of that. That means that you've had some fluid retention, and essentially you're wearing a compression sock down lower that keeps the fluid pushed up. Typically, interstitial fluid is moved through the body through the lymphatic system, and just basic movement like walking and climbing steps and things like that, just your basic movement throughout the day. But you do need to move, is what that muscles contracting is what squeezes that fluid through the body and through those lymphatic vessels and back to the heart. So essentially the circulatory system is not a closed system. You have your blood vessels that take blood that's oxygenated from your heart, and it goes throughout the body. It services the tissues, and it comes back through the veins. But there is some blood that is lost in that, not lost, but the fluid, the plasma, goes out of the cells and into the interstitial spaces. And that fluid works its way back through the interstitial spaces into the lymphatic system and back through a port into the heart again and returns to the circulatory system. So the lymph nodes are an important part of that. And as that lymphatic fluid is moved back to the heart, those lymph nodes are filtering it out in such a way that it comes back to the heart in a fairly clean fashion, as opposed to having other things that have been caught in it or picked up in it if it went straight back to the heart. So swollen lymph nodes, when you're sick, you've had some bacteria or something else in the interstitial fluid that causes a swelling of your lymph nodes. Sometimes cancers can infect lymph nodes, and that's because, again, it's metastasized, it's moving potentially, and it's being filtered through the lymph nodes on its way back to the heart. So it can move around that way. So edema is essentially lymph that has increased down in the lower extremities, especially if you haven't been moving a lot. Jaundice, fever, so we talked about it being helpful for fever reduction. Strangery is a bladder blockage that has strong pain associated, and along with that strong pain, an urge to go to the bathroom too. So it's kind of a tough combination, but it can help alleviate strangery. And then also for some STDs like syphilis and gonorrhea, it can be helpful in relieving some of those symptoms. It also can function as a cancer preventative. It's not hasn't been indicated so much for a reversal, but it has some preventative qualities. One recipe that's helpful in that regard is 1 tablespoon of parsley. Simmer that in 1 pint of boiling water. pint of boiling water, and let that boil for 10 minutes. Let it stand and strain it. So you want to have it cool, and then you can drink 1 to 3 cups per day. Just take a large swallow at a time, swish it around, and then drink it. So this would be a tea essentially that you've made, an infusion, and that's made from the parsley leaves. So you could probably get a higher grade benefit from fresh parsley, although you could probably get some benefit from dried parsley as well. For low menstruation, you can combine parsley leaves in equal parts. Parsley leaves, buchu, black haw, and cramp bark. So these are 3 different plants that I am not familiar with. Buchu is actually from Africa, rather. And black haw is from the southern United States, and cramp bark is from the eastern United States. And all 3 of those, along with parsley, have benefits with menstrual issues. So they can work synergistically together to help bring that back into regularity. Also, parsley can function the leaves to help expel gallstones, so helpful in gallbladder issues. It's always nice to have a good insect bite remedy around the house or sting. You can use the tea for hot fomentations on a bite or a sting from an insect, and can help that reduce its inflammatory nature and feel better more quickly than just leaving it alone. And the way you would make that is 1 tablespoon of parsley leaves into 1 cup of boiling water and steep that for 20 minutes. And then use that tea for the hot fomentations. Basically put a washcloth or a small towel into that, wring it out, and the warmth as well as the tea itself will be beneficial in drawing out the poisons. It's very high in potassium. Talked about that. That's good. And then a poultice of the crushed leaves. So the fresh leaves, just take those and grind them. You can use a mortar and pestle to grind those up, or you could put them in a little grinder or a blender with a small cap on it. And you can use that for swollen glands. So the glands that are swollen would be like lymph nodes. That's typically what a gland is that is referred to as being swollen. Swollen breasts, and to aid in weaning. So if a mother has been lactating and has soreness that's associated with the infant stopping to nurse, then it can aid the weaning process and have it be less painful. The seeds can be used when crushed. So crush those seeds in, so 1 teaspoon of crushed seeds per cup of boiling water. Steep them. So basically that's letting them soak in that boiling water, and then strain it out with a small strainer. And that can be used in the hair to remove lice and fleas. So hair-borne vermin, essentially. So you want to use it, you can use it generously, but if you have a kidney infection, you don't want to use it too extensively because it can have some negative indications for kidney infection. But aiding in like not gallstones, but kidney stones and gravel in the urinary tract, essentially those are calcified entities that are trying to be moved through and can be quite painful to pass. If anybody's ever passed a gallstone, you might not wish that on your worst enemy. But typically a person on a more alkaline diet that does not have meat associated with it will have much less, if no, issues with gallstones at all. So that shouldn't be a part of your paradigm unless you're eating things that are more high acid forming and will create those gallstones too, but kidney stones. So looking at, in the Journal of Traditional Chinese Medicine, Parsley, looking at a review of ethnopharmacology, that's the way people use things for medicine, and phytochemistry and various biological activities, back in 2013, they found that parsley was helpful from an ethnopharmacological standpoint, that is using food for medicine, people using it, for otitis, which essentially is ear infections. So the an otoscope is one that looks down the ear and sees if there is swelling or inflammation in the ear canal. For runny nose, diabetes, it can be beneficial for diabetes. can function as a brain protective, so it has some neuroprotective qualities. Also has some analgesic qualities, pain-killing qualities. We talked about spasmolytics in a couple previous times that we talked together, and basically that relieves smooth muscle cramps. And smooth muscles are those muscles that are found that move substances through body channels. So that's going to be your gastrointestinal tract. It's going to be your blood vessels, actually. But your GI from mouth to the other end is all going to be controlled by smooth muscle. And any kind of substance that's going to be released from any organ into a passageway is going to be controlled by smooth muscle. And it's essentially autonomic, meaning that it is not controlled by you, and it can cramp without your permission, as can skeletal muscle. But cramping of smooth muscle is never a pleasant experience, stomach cramps and the like. So using parsley juice or the whole leaves, just eat them, can be helpful in preventing smooth muscle cramps. It also can function as a mild immunosuppressant, which can be beneficial in some respects. So in a mild form, not to the point where it would actually decrease your immune system, more on the side, immunosuppressant is typically on the side of like organ rejection kinds of immunosuppressions. So that would be autoimmunity types of situations. Because in the same sense, it actually has a cytoprotective effect. So cytoprotection, cyto means cells, and it protects them from damage. And I don't know exactly what part of the cell it protects from damage, but there's different levels of cellular protection that could be enhanced. We have the membrane, and then we also have DNA protective effects, as well as the various organelles inside. But overall, it has a cytoprotective effect. It can also function as a hypotensive, basically helping to lower blood pressure. So if one has elevated blood pressure, it can help to bring that into a normal range or a lower range. And it also, interestingly enough, has antibacterial and antifungal qualities that have been recorded about parsley. Then looking in another journal, Genes and Nutrition, looking at various herbs and spices as biomarkers of intake based on human intervention. In a review in 2019, they found that there was a specific flavonoid that is also present in chamomile, grapefruit, onions, wheat sprouts. It's called Apigenin. And Apigenin is one of the specific flavonoids or phytofactors in parsley that has anti-inflammatory effects and actually has some anti-cancer protective agent effects, basically functioning in a chemoprotective role. Apigenin has a promising molecule for cancer prevention. Is another article from Pharmacy Reviews by Skuka Gupta in 2010. They found that not only does it have antioxidant capacities, and we have talked in the past about what an antioxidant is. Essentially, that is providing electrons for oxygen-free radicals, which are electron deficient, which when they're electron deficient, they become damaging to the tissues and cells that surround them, because they're going to grab electrons from complete tissues to complement or complete themselves, and then the process cause damage. And we call that oxidative stress. So antioxidants prevent that from happening. Also can function in an anti-inflammatory role, which essentially all inflammation is based on oxidation, and then having some anti-cancer roles as well. And it may benefit or prevent several different types of cancers. So various GI cancers of the gastrointestinal tract, skin cancer, so that's a surface cancer, prostate cancer, breast cancer, and various, they called them hemo cancers, but that's essentially referring to them as blood cancers. So that's parsley from a culinary perspective, something that we don't use much of, but maybe we could use more of and have some specific benefits from partaking in more parsley.